Good morning, and welcome to the North Chapel. My name is Kathy Estemborski, and I'll be today's service coordinator. Our minister, Reverend Dr. Leon Dunkley, will be providing today's reflection. If you're visiting, welcome, and please sign the guest book that's in the back of the church. If you haven't turned off your cell phones, please do so. Anything that will beep or buzz. And we have a couple different announcements today. And also, before I forget, Barbara is going to be doing art after the service today downstairs. There's a table set out with different art supplies. So it's just an informal way to kind of spend some time together and make something lovely. And we're going to have coffee hour, and Mary's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Good morning. So last week, Gwen had a coffee cup with a map on the end. Now I have a coffee cup waiting to be filled. So we're going to start, hopefully with tea for me. And Richard's made the coffee. So hopefully many of you will come down. It's a masks optional coffee hour. And we're going to try organizing it slightly differently. So I will be down there with a sign-up sheet. And we need a person who will make coffee. If you don't know how to make coffee, just tell me, and we will pair you with somebody who does. We are not going to have copious refreshments unless people decide they want to bring them. So it's a voluntary basis. I can see that several people today have brought things. So if you have leftover cookies or something that you'd like to donate on the Sunday, please bring them. And last, one of the jobs of coffee hour, we used to have committees do it, so there would be 2 or 3 or 4 people each time. One of the jobs of coffee hour is always washing up. So we're going to try something different here too. So after you've finished your coffee or your tea, in the kitchen there are sinks, and we will have one sink filled with hot water, soapy hot water, and one sink filled with just hot water. So wash your cup, rinse it, and stick it in the drain so that people don't have a big job after coffee hour. So if you have any questions, I will be down there after the service for coffee hour. So come drink. Non-alcohol.
Thanks, Mary. We're also coming up on our spring fling auction, and Polly's going to come up and talk a little bit about that.
Well, as you can see, the altar is decorated with items that people will have donated for our auction, and I invite you all to come up and peruse what's on there. And the 4th Sunday, again, will be a time when people can let me know, or I will call people if I hear they have something. And the 4th Sunday, I will also decorate the altar with items like that. Thank you. You're all so generous.
I have 2 announcements. One is that I have been sequestered by the auction committee to donate a lasagna or 2. I just wanted to let everybody know that the lasagna usually costs about $100,000. And I've offered it to North Chapel at half price, so it's very, very good. So that's 1. 2 is we were visited 2 weeks ago. 1 and 2 weeks ago by a young man who was needing money. He came up to me personally and said, my car is broken down, my wife has walking pneumonia, we're stuck here, the alternator's down. And I believed him. He quoted the cost of an alternator, said that he had this much in his pocket and the remainder that he needed, and it added up in my mind, and I trusted him. He said he was a recovering heroin addict, and I trusted that. It turns out that he's also returning again and again, and I'm suspicious of his character. I'm not saying that because that's new. There are lots of scams. Many of you may have received emails from me this week saying things that I'm definitely not going to email you. I will call you. I will not email. So if you receive anything that's electronic, even a text, let's make sure we check in about it, especially if it has to do with the exchange of money. Please don't exchange money unless you talk to me or a member of the board about what's going on. And those are my announcements. So just lastly, the lasagna is worth it. So, well, that's for you to announce.
So please check your order of service for additional announcements, and just to also point out that Leon is now doing office hours, and those are Tuesdays from 3 to 5 and Wednesdays from 12 to 2. So that's a great opportunity for folks to be able to come in and just informally sit down with Leon one-on-one. As a member of the Board of Trustees for the North Chapel, I've been thinking about, and we've been talking about, rebuilding our North Chapel community as we navigate the new normal the COVID-19 pandemic has left us with. How do we increase the fellowship we so dearly miss in a way that is safe? That is a question that was brought up at last week's annual meeting and will be an ongoing conversation going forward. We welcome all of your input and participation in that conversation. Community may mean different things to different people. What community means to me is friendship, support, a safe place to explore new ideas, and I find that at North Chapel. When we have a community where we share what matters most to us, we strengthen the idea that belonging to something bigger than ourselves allows us to know we're not alone and we understand how important connection is. For today's opening words, I found a poem that was written in collaboration by a class at William James College. It's called Resilience in a Pandemic. Taking each moment, one breath at a time, one day at a time, my resilience has surprised me. As I'm getting comfortable with living with uncertainty, I underestimated the things I took for granted, and I crave control of the things I can't control. But I'm trying to exercise forgiveness like a muscle, and it's slowly getting stronger. I have everything I need within me to get through moment by moment, and I warmly embrace the quiet as if it were a friend at the beginning of something else. We are at a distance, but closer than ever. We feel gratitude and despair in the same breath. We are strong, but we need each other. Your faith gives me strength to believe. So, think happy, be happy.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. There's a story the story of the stolen smell. Do you know that story? So there was a very poor man who was walking in a town, and it was a nice town, and all the people were friendly for the most part. It was in upstate New York, so it had good seasons, spread of seasons, a beautiful spring, a very cold winter. This was in the summertime. It was very warm outside, and the poor man didn't know quite what to do with himself. He was very hungry, and he was looking for satisfaction. And he wandered by the bakery, and although he couldn't eat anything, he couldn't afford to buy anything, he sat in front of the bakery and just smelled the delicious smells for about an hour or two. And when the baker found out, he came out and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I don't have enough money to buy anything from you, but I wanted to smell the delicious food that you're making." And he said, the baker said, those smells belong to me. You stole them. So he goes to the magistrate and he says, "There's a thief in town and we need to do something about it." And he brings the guy up on charges. And it goes before the court. And the judge is being fair. He's like, "It's a fair case. And let me know what's going on." And the baker stands up forthrightly and says, I'm a hardworking person, and I go to work early in the morning, and I make delicious food for the town. And here was this man outside of my bakery stealing the smells that belonged to me. And the judge says, "That's a reasonable complaint." And he turns to the poor man and says, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" And the poor man says, "No, I did that." And he said, "Well, I know you're poor, but you're gonna have to pay for that, okay?" And the poor man says, "I have very little money on me," and he says, "Do you have anything at all?" And the poor man says, "Yes, but I have only coins." And he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a handful of coins. And the judge says, "That'll do." And he asks the baker, he says, "Can you see those coins in his hands?" And the baker says, "Yes." And he says, "You see the coins, he took the smells, call it even." And he returned the money to the poor man. I'm going to move this over here for a moment. I want to do something different today. It's a studio thing now, church. You're a G, Peggy. It's in G. Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. Today is Sunday, February the 5th, and the title of this morning's reflection is "How Dare You?" Proverbs for when the world begins to lose its marbles. Well, the moon is in the ocean, and the stars are in the sky. All that I can see are my sweet Maria's eyes. So come on, Sarah, Sarah Maria. Sarah Maria, yeah, 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 yeah. You know about the sugar cane that comes from way down south. You got one end in your hand, got one end in her mouth. So come on, Sarah, Sarah Maria. Sarah Maria, yeah, 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 yeah. So can you sing that chorus with me? So it's Sarah, Sarah Maria, Sarah Maria, yeah, 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 yeah. One more time. Sarah, Sarah Maria, Sarah Maria, yeah, 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 yeah. Beautiful. Playing bass is very challenging. My teacher tells me that acoustic bass is among the most physically demanding of musical instruments. Like all instruments, it requires incredible subtlety, but unlike most instruments, it's very physical. It requires a great deal of strength and flexibility, and for long months, my hands would cramp terribly. They still do on occasion, but less frequently now. I committed powerfully to the study of this instrument, and I will continue to commit powerfully as my relationship with it deepens. If I ever get courage enough to use the bow in front of you, then you'll know that I'm either really good or I'm really courageous. Because man, I sound terrible with a bow. Oh my God, terrible. Having first played guitar, the acoustic bass seems strange to me. It's upright, for one thing, aside from just being enormous. It's fretless. So the placement of the fingers needs to be very precise. The scale length is different, so the intervallic relationship is all new to me. The order and the theory and the logic of the fretboard are the same, but everything else is new. Bass playing is different on an order of magnitude, and this change has me reassessing everything. I wonder if that makes sense to you, but my bass is making me think differently about the world. How dare you? It's really a lot of work, and you can't do a lot of work without a lot of strength, because I get it wrong a lot along the journey of learning, because we need of ourselves forgiveness if we're going to learn anything new. Over time, I'm improving, but I don't focus on my improvements. I focus on my body and on my spirit and on my journey. I focus on the strengthening of my heart. But how does one do that? How does one strengthen the heart? If I were to ask my friend and colleague, Joan Javier Duval, the minister at the Unitarian Church in Montpelier, I think I know what she would say. I think she would say absolutely nothing. Instead, I think she would put her right hand on her heart. And I think she would support that hand with her left. And I think that she would slow herself and coordinate her breathing intentionally. Will you try this exercise with me? Will you allow yourself to breathe deeply? Allow yourself to settle in. Place your right hand over your heart. Support your right hand with your left. Check in with yourself and release whatever tensions you may find in your body. Turn your right hand over to face your left and allow them to grasp themselves. Focus your intention, your light, your grace, your energy on your heart. Gently increase the tension in your hands by pulling them against each other. And gently release that tension. Slightly ungrasp your hands, but hold the energy, your grace, your light, the focus of your attention. Offer this light to the world like a gift. Offer it to one another like a treasure. And offer it to yourself. And receive it as a blessing. There are 12 quick steps to strengthening your heart, and one can do this musically. One can breathe deeply and fully. One can allow oneself to settle. One can hold safe onto one's own heart. One can support oneself. One can release tensions. One can turn and face oneself. One can focus on one's heart. One can gently increase tension. One can gently release the tension. One can offer it like a gift. One can treasure those around us. And one can bless oneself. In music theory, it all gets very complicated. The theoreticians would call this exercise the cycle of fifths. Artists are more creative. Sometimes they don't even have a word for it. The theologians know that the artists and the theoreticians are both correct, even as they can't stop arguing with one another. Both of them have their own good work to do. That good work requires strength. It requires a strengthening of the heart that we call courage. And courage can be a very daring thing. Overcoming fear requires courage. In a song called Inconsolable, Jonathan Brooks sings about this idea. She says, "I never knew what enough was until I had more than my share, and then I let the darkness in. It was then I lost the dare. It was then that I lost the day." There will always be challenges around us. There will always be too much and not enough. How do we find the courage, the strength of heart we need to survive these challenges? How do we not let the darkness in, and how do we not lose the dare? How do we do these things? We do them by cleaving to our values and sharing them openly with one another. We do this by blossoming into the fullness of who we are and who we can be. We do this by gently overcoming our deepest fears. It was Marianne Williamson who said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." Do you know this quote? She continues, "We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel unsure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. And it's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. So we let our own light shine. We consciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others." End quote. It's a very famous quotation. Unfortunately, I think it's famous because it's misattributed to Nelson Mandela. It's been misquoted by astronauts and educators. It was misquoted by Hillary Clinton at one point. Subsequently, it was misquoted by every commencement speaker and valedictorian who was inclined to do so for about 30 years. We'd like to think that Nelson Mandela said these words, but he didn't say them. Marianne Williamson did in a book that she published in 1992. It was called A Return to Love. Now, I'd like to think that we're all groovy enough to quote a new agey self-help energy healer from Los Angeles, but we're not that groovy. This quote isn't famous because we believe that Marianne Williamson wrote it. It's famous because we want to believe that Nelson Mandela said it. It's important to be honest with ourselves about these things, and it is not bad. It really isn't. It actually says something beautiful about us. It says something beautiful about how daring we are and how daring we can become. That we would want to put such beautiful, peaceful, and hope-filled words in the mouth of the man who fought so tenaciously and so wholeheartedly against South African apartheid. This is the first Sunday of Black History Month. Black History Month is a celebration that traces back more than a century to the efforts of a man named Carter G. Woodson and others who wanted to amplify stories of race that had been glossed over or marginalized or banned. In 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month, and he called on the public to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every endeavor throughout history. These efforts continue still today, but not without attacks and not without disparagement. I learned from the news this week about a controversy surrounding the College Board's decision to revise the curriculum for the advanced placement course for African American Studies. Did anybody hear this? It might sound remote from us, but it really isn't. And I'm quoting this: the revised curriculum removes Black Lives Matter, slavery reparations, and queer theory as required topics in this course of study. It adds in a section on Black conservatism. Many prominent authors and academics have also been removed from the AP curriculum, including James Baldwin, Frantz Fanon, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, June Jordan, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, Manning Marable, Tanahashi Coates, Michelle Alexander, Kimberly Crenshaw, Barbara Ransby, Roderick Ferguson, E. Patrick Johnson, and Kianga Yamada Taylor. Learning of this, I thought to myself, how dare you? I mean, this is akin to revising a musical course on the history of the Beatles by removing sections on John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and 3/5 of Ringo Starr, while adding in a section on the music of the Reverend Billy Graham. If you'll remember, Billy Graham is the one who said that the Beatles should get a haircut and that fads like them have a way of passing, like Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley, different ones that have attracted teenagers by the thousands in years past. And while I may theologically argue with people like Billy Graham, I have real respect for anyone who honestly, non-violently, and wholeheartedly gives their life to prayer. No one of us gets it right. No one of us can. But I can say, without the slightest hesitation, that I am very happy not to have learned about the history of rock and roll from Billy Graham. We are living through a strange time right now. There are so many lies and so many thefts and so many foolish conspiracies. It can leave us tired and feeling defeated, but beauty always helps me. Poetry always helps. Grounding ourselves back in reality after a time away, this heals us. It helps us to come back home to ourselves, remembering, recovering, rediscovering the daring feeling of being alive. We can get displaced from ourselves without even knowing it sometimes, and we can laugh at ourselves or at one another. We can laugh ourselves right out of the garden. And remember how they used to deride environmentalists by calling them tree huggers? or self-appointed saviors of the spotted owl. It's so easy to trivialize the holy. It's so vulgar and so average and so commonplace and so mundane and so effective in scaring us away from our best selves. And when the trivial takes over, it sits in the seat of the sacred and drives us apart from one another. And we turn away from ourselves and we turn away from community, scattered by shame and cackling laughter. And we find ourselves laughing at that wounded part of our own selves, at a part of ourselves that we may not even recognize anymore. I hate that BS. I hate it. It is so common in the world today, so abundant and so banal. Which is why it's so important to stay courageous and to stay tenacious. It's so important not to lose the dare. I wonder if Greta Thunberg would describe herself as daring. I wonder if she sees herself as a tree-hugging savior. You know who I'm talking about, right? The young woman, teenage environmentalist from, where's she, Sweden? I don't see her as a tree-hugging savior. I see her quite differently. I see her as one of the few remaining rational human beings on the planet. She just seems so normal to me, normal in a world half gone insane. I think she said it best. I just pray that we were listening. She was so compelling, even though she was only 16 years old at the time. Bravely, she stood before those who had gathered, those world leaders who had assembled themselves in the United Nations, and she stood before them and she said, "This is wrong. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you come to us young people for hope. How dare you?" How dare we indeed, she was right. How dare we? How dare we burden the younger generations with the consequences of our own behavior? Greta Thunberg was right to raise the question, but what do we do now? Where do we go from here? I ask this question as a theologian and as a public intellectual. I ask this question because righteous indignation is not the answer anymore. Laughing, mocking, and derisiveness won't save us from ourselves. In 2019, a man named Dr. Jordan Peterson was a panelist on a late-night talk show on cable TV. Bill Maher was the host. Bill Maher is a Democrat, clearly partisan. He doesn't hide it. Dr. Peterson is not a politician. He is a psychologist from Canada. At one point in the conversation between them, it became a little awkward. At the tail end of a liberal tirade against the sitting president at the time, Dr. Peterson tried pretty hard to get off the left-bound train, but he had trouble doing it. He said, "I've been listening to all of this talk about Trump and how things go, how conversations go in the US. And I have one question about it. There are all these people who are on the conservative side, who are aligned with Trump for all sorts of reasons. And there's this tension around his presidency and various attempts to pull him out of office. What do you think will happen if this comes to pass? What do you think will happen to these people who are identified with Trump? And how is it that Democratic types, for example, are holding out their hand to these conservative types as if to say, welcome back into the fold?" Now, Dr. Peterson said he had one question, but he asked three. And he raised them all and didn't pause for an answer. He just kept going, he just kept talking, he just kept sharing his perspective as an outsider. Dr. Peterson wanted to get off the train, and that's hard to do. It's really hard. It's hard to head off in a new direction when you're on a left-bound train. It's hard to head off in a new direction when you're on a train of any kind that departs from our truest sense of community. How dare we? Regardless of our politics, how dare we turn away from one another? This is what I hear Greta Thunberg say. Imperfectly, perhaps, she was only 16 years old at the time, and perfectly, perhaps because she chose not to turn away, she fully embraced her sense of soul, her sense of self, her sense of courage, or wholeheartedness. And she clearly sees the crisis that we are all in, Most of us don't see as clearly as she does. Most of us have forgotten how to see as clearly. But there is joy there, not sorrow. There is grace there, not grief. Peace is there, not righteousness. Hope is there, not despair, and all conjoined together. We no longer need to turn away from our wholeness. We need to overcome our deepest fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond all measure. We need to be powerful now. Joni Mitchell reminds us we've got to shake our fists like lightning now. We've got to run like forest fire. We've got to shed our light like blazes all across the sky, because they're going to aim the hoses on us, and we've got to show them that we won't expire. Not till we've burned up every passion, and not even when we die. The precious question before us is not who are we to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, or fabulous. The precious question before us is who are we not to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous. You should say those words to yourself next time you're brushing your teeth, looking in the mirror, hair a mess. I'm brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous. Don't turn away from that question. I pray you don't ever do that. When we turn away, terrible things can happen. Last month, on the 10th of January, 5 men turned away from the precious question that was before them. They were not brilliant, they were not gorgeous, talented, or fabulous. In the words of the Memphis Police Chief, C.J. Davis, these men were heinous, reckless, and inhumane. Last month, on the 10th of January, 5 men stood before a 29-year-old Tyree Nichols, and when they did, they took his life. And when they did that, something within us died, something precious, something tender, something holy, something special, and we need to name that loss, and we need to grieve that loss. Tyree was a father, a friend, a lover, a skateboarder, and a good man. How is it that it was possible to lose sight of his humanity over the course of an average traffic stop? Robbie Blish is the chief of police here in Woodstock, and I'm very grateful for his service. I called him this week because I was very angry and brokenhearted about what had taken place in Memphis, Tennessee. I called him and I left a message with a heavy heart, and when he called me back, we had a discussion about all of this. We talked about the complexities of race and class and power and violence, the complexities that lay against the simple fact that Tyree Nichols should still be alive. I called Chief Blish to begin and to engage in a public conversation that will allow us to grieve our losses and will guide us to choose a better way forward. I can't imagine what the family is experiencing right now, what they're going through. I know that Tyree was a beautiful person and much beloved. At the funeral services, Reverend Kamala Harris spoke, and Benjamin Crump spoke, the attorney in these days of crisis, and the Reverend Dallas Sharpton spoke there as well. He spoke directly to the parents of Tyree Nichols, and he said, the reason why what happened to Tyree is so personal to me is that 5 black men who would not have had a job in the police department, would not have even been thought of to be part of an elite squad in the city in which Dr. King lost his life. They beat a brother to death. And there's nothing more insulting and offensive to those who fight to open doors than that you walk through those doors and act like the folks that we had to fight to get you through. You didn't get to the police department by yourself. The police chief didn't get there by herself. People had to march. People had to go to jail, and some of them lost their lives to open doors for you. How dare you act like that sacrifice was for nothing? It can rekindle something in us if we allow it to. All of this great weight, the ocean of sorrow, the failure of broken systems, the callousness of men and women and weapons and bad ideas, the confluence of fear and strife and inequality, and the holy thought that we can overcome all of this. When I say these words, how dare you, let it be for the truths that are higher than righteous indignation. When we say the words, how dare you, let it be for truths that are more refined than sorrow, death, and suffering. We are children of God. Playing small does not serve the world in which we live. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we consciously give others permission to do the same. There is something beautiful before us. There is a chance to live out our values. There is an opportunity to grow out of our sorrow and grow into the promise of coming days, the days that have our names written upon them, the days that know the simple sweetness of life. Because we know about the sugar cane that comes from way down south. Got one end in her hand, got one end in the mouth. So come on, Sarah, Sarah Maria. Sarah Maria, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, the moon is in the ocean, and the stars are in the sky. All that I can see are my sweet Maria's eyes. So come on, Sarah, Sarah Maria. Sarah Maria, yeah, yeah, yeah. May the new life that we make possible by knowing the best that is within us strengthen our practice as we move forward with each new day. May it be so. Blessed be. And amen. So subtle is that revolutionary muscle that overcomes the greatest of challenges. So soft is that voice that breaks through the darkness, that pierces the darkness and sets us free. Protect, shelter, nurture that still quiet voice that was just now so present in the room. That voice, that energy, that light, that grace that breaks us free. May it be so. Blessed be. And amen.